Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal.
If Joshua tricks them into launching an attack, it'll be your fault.
My fault? The whole point was to find a way to practice nuclear war without destroying ourselves, to get the computers to learn from mistakes we couldn't afford to make. Except that I never could get Joshua to learn the most important lesson.
What's that?
Futility. That there's a time when you should just give up.
What kind of a lesson is that?
Did you ever play tic-tac-toe?
Yeah, of course.
But you don't anymore.
No.
Why?
Because it's a boring game. It's always a tie.
Exactly. There's no way to win. The game itself is pointless. But back at the war room, they believe you can win a nuclear war. But there can be acceptable losses.
All right, everyone, welcome to part 2 of the dangers of AI. So that was from War Games 1983, talking about computers and systems and how we're trying to make them think and be different and do things that humans wouldn't, couldn't, or don't want to do. So today we are going to jump into it again. Good morning, Dee. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. We took some time to think about these things, and I think we had some ideas when we recorded the first podcast, but we've been having some conversations, checked in with some friends, and we have some thoughts.
Yeah, so today we wanted to pick up where we left off, basically, part 2 of the dangers of AI that we had the discussion about 3 weeks ago by exploring the topic of AI guardrails. We asked a few of our close engineering friends to join us today on the podcast, but because of conflicts of interests, because they work at companies and AI is pretty prevalent in almost every company at this point, they could not join us today. But we will put on our philosophy, psychology, and technology hats, and Demetrius and I will dig in. Well, Dee, this has been an ongoing conversation for quite some time now. And it's getting a lot of attention because so many companies are now making AI a part of what they do, specifically tech companies. So how should we be thinking about guardrails and making sure that this stuff doesn't get out of control?
Well, I think one of the big ways is to take a look at each of the dangers and think about, how can we counter this specific danger? And I think one of them, starting off with misinformation, because I think that's the one that people are bringing up a lot with ChatGPT, because it's being used as a kind of a replacement for a search engine. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's in tech, sold our company recently, he's doing very well. And we'd start talking about how ChatGPT has been good for kind of being an aggregator and going out and finding kind of what's relevant for the specificities of your search in order to get right to the point. But one of the things that's missing right now, I thought this and she thought this independently, was it doesn't provide you with the sourcing and where it's getting its information.
Correct.
And that is kind of coming down to how well can you trust this, and how old is this information, or how new?
I don't know if you recall, I actually sent you a link to a company that was working on this about a week or two ago. And I thought they did a really good job. Trying to see if I can actually find it. I had tested it out, but basically, I think it's Perplexity AI. Let me see here. Basically, what they were doing is as you come into the system and you do your search, every bit of kind of factual information that it presents to you from the ChatGPT automatically puts a footnote on it. You click on it, and then it gives you the source of where it came from, which is essentially exactly what you were looking for. And I think they're doing a really good job with it.
And I think it needs to be built in. I think that needs to be kind of an industry requirement. If you look
yes, it is. Sorry, D. Yes, okay. It is. So Perplexity is a third party that does it. And it's really nice. I've been using it kind of exclusively for the ChatGPT stuff now because it gives me all the references that I can add into different documents that I write.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at Wikipedia, I tell people, especially students who are going out into the internet to look for sources, I tell them, you can use Wikipedia, but actually look at their sources at the bottom of the page. Or as you're looking through, look at the footnotes, see what the sources are, then follow the source back, see if it's a good source. And also actually go to that source material and read that and source that and reference that rather than the Wikipedia article. But it's a good place to start for sure. And I think that with something like ChatGPT, if they provided sourcing And that I think that needs to be kind of an ethical standard of like every time that I'm answering a question, here is maybe a footnote link, or it's baked in some way, or provided like here are my sources. You can take a look and see what you think of those sources.
This kind of comes down to education. So when we were in
Mhm.
school, and the internet was becoming very, very popular, obviously, and getting better and that kind of stuff. Every class I had, especially in college, they were like, double and triple check your sources. Is it a primary source or a secondary source? Make sure you bring that to class. Critical thinking. I mean, does this just kind of come down to education? Just helping people understand that some of these technology tools aren't going to do all the work for you right this moment, that you have to do your due diligence on your own?
Well, I think the answer is yes, but I think it's a double yes because I think that it's yes on the case of the consumer, but it's also yes for the AI.
Mm-hmm.
I think that these AIs are probably going to need some level of trustworthiness training, like how to evaluate sources. And you would try to get it so that it's unbiased and everything like that. But of course, whoever's creating the AI is going to have their own bias, and because it's an AI, it could develop its own biases. But when we, as consumers of information, take a look at the sources out there of information, we're applying an algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
It's a human mental algorithm as opposed to a computer algorithm, but that means that it can be kind of duplicated in one way or another for the AI. So I think in addition to providing sourcing, and I think that, we continue to have education through the schools and outside of schools and maybe in tech or even through the AI as far as like how to evaluate your sources. I think that the AI itself needs to be trained in order to evaluate trustworthiness and be providing information from good sources and recognize that, somebody's daily stormer blog is probably not the best source for some information.
I was thinking about this and I'm like, God, can you ever really do this perfectly to the point where you could just look at information and truly trust it without having to, deeply investigate every single piece of information that the AI provides you? And then I thought back about how we used to do the introductions of our graduate research. And,
Hmm.
remember our professors would say, hey, I need you to go out and I need you to go find through the journals, right? All these
Hmm.
different all these different teams that have conducted research in the space you're interested in, and I need you to find stuff that is, specifically exactly what you're trying to research, stuff that's kind of a little bit like it, stuff that's around it, and then you're going to read all that research, and then you're going to kind of summarize it, and you're going to tell this story about like, okay, well, this research was done this way, and this was the outcome. This research was done pretty much the same way, but we had a different outcome, and here's why, and that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. I almost wonder if when it comes down to AI providing was quote unquote factual or educational information rather than creative information, that it should say, hey, Tucker Carlson said this, and this person on CNN said this, and NPR said this, and based on our analysis, it looks like it's somewhere in the middle. Or it looks like NPR was 100% correct, and these two, made these adjustments to the facts based on our source that came from,
Yeah.
the AP or whatever it is. Like, there might be a different methodology in which information or the UI presents the information to you, so you do not immediately become biased because you say, "Oh, I read it and it said that this information is correct." And then when you
Yeah.
look underneath it, it's only one source that it pulled from.
Well, there's definitely a UX front end perspective that needs to be taken account of as far as the reliability of the information, whether or not it's something that came from like something that we were taught in school was to evaluate whether it's coming from a general audience paper or if it's news, like an actual news report, or if
Yeah.
it's an opinion show, like Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow or something like that. It's coming from a comedy show, like The Daily Show
Mm-hmm.
versus if it's coming from the AP or something like that. There's a difference even amongst the Fox News and MSNBC show programs that are very highly focused now on opinion because it makes them more money versus actual news reporting.
So
And
that means now we're actually providing classification of
Yes.
information. So we go, okay, we look at it just like when we did coding systems and things like that. We're going to look at it and say, okay, stuff that comes from Fox News has a reliability rating of 10%, let's say.
Mhm.
That's just me being really mean right now. And then and then you look at something from NPR and it's like 95%, right? And then it somehow gives that information over to you in a way that helps you consume it properly. Because like if you look at the bottom, for example, of Fox News, in a lot of the shows that they have, it says this information is for entertainment purposes only. I don't know
Yes.
if you knew that, right? So that
Well,
means it
most of
should
that
be
stuff now is opinion stuff, and that's
yeah,
something that needs to be clearly separated. I would actually, if I was sourcing information stuff for this, I would steer clear of all opinion stuff and just
yeah,
go directly to the news information, because what they don't always know is whether you're Tucker Carlson, whether you're Rachel Maddow, whether you're Stephen Colbert or whoever else, or the guy from last week tonight whose name is escaping, John Oliver.
yeah.
All of their information that they're presenting in order to build something, an opinion around, those are all coming from actual sources like news sources or journal articles.
Yes.
So you can skip the middleman. It's one of the values or functions that those shows are providing is they're aggregating sources, but they're doing it with a built-in bias. This has the opportunity to avoid that and go directly to the reporting. And one of the things that AI can do that is very difficult, or at least time consuming for a human to do, is when it comes to the academic research out there, which you for us when we were in grad school or when we were working in academics, you would go through and read all of the relevant research
Oh
and then
yeah.
aggregate it all together and write your intro. This can do it all in moments, using technology in order to get you something. You can imagine, for example, if you are researching, if you're a lawyer or somebody who's just interested in the law and you're researching all the prior um, legal arguments or legal opinions on, I'm going back to opinion, but it's a little bit different because it's a legal opinion on a certain free speech or Second Amendment interpretation or anything like
Hmm.
that. It can go back through and find all of the case law and summarize that and provide it to you, rather than a lawyer going through and spending however much time it takes for them to go through LexisNexis and find all that stuff and summarize it. So
True.
that's one way in which, by providing sourcing and on the back end going through and kind of aggregating all the different relevant sources and having that trustworthiness training and recognizing there's a difference between an academic source journal, an academic journal with peer review versus someone's opinion on a blog or even a news, even like a TV show, that they can get to more reliable information.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of interpretation that goes on there, though, D. Because like even when we say like, oh, a peer-reviewed journal article, one of the issues that we found with peer-reviewed journal articles in school, and it wasn't a quote unquote issue like a problem, it's just something you have to be aware of. Is, for example, when you start to read, the results of a study or whatever, the summary, right? You have to make
Mhm.
sure that you really get into the nitty gritty, because it might be something like one study who was studying, let's say, bias in communication, had
Mhm.
only college students as their user base, right? And then someone else studying bias might have only had people from, senior living facilities or
Mhm.
something, like, right? And you have to look at that and say, okay, when I'm writing my intro, I need to make sure I'm very clear that this study's results came from people over the age of 50, and this results came from people between the ages of 18 and 24, right? And you have to tell that story. And the AI has to be able to go in and actually look at the differences between them and really understand how scientific research works, for example, in that case, right? And then say, hey,
Yeah.
D, here are the results and here's what you should consider. But keep in mind that these are different samples in which this came from, right? Now we're educating people on how to understand the interpretation of what comes from the AI. I could see how this can get very convoluted very quickly.
Well, I think what we're talking about at that point is kind of a goal state to get to, maybe.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of intermediate steps before we get there. And I don't know if somebody's doing, if you look at the peer review, and hopefully the algorithm, the AI can get good enough to do this, and it's got some questionable methodologies or sampling processes. Like I remember a
Uh-huh.
while ago, somebody sent me a a news article that said that eating red meat was associated with these health problems. And then I looked up the actual journal article that they were referencing. And one of the first thing was, all right, well, this is one journal article. Like, that's not how consensus has gotten to. Usually you have to go out and have somebody needs to replicate those findings over and over again before you get to the point where like you really accept it. You usually don't get to like scientific knowledge off of one study.
No.
But I remember looking at it, and they were their entire methodology was they had people self-report journal about their food eating habits for one weekend, and then correlated that to health.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, there's tons of problems with that. Maybe they just went to a barbecue that weekend and ate more red meat than they would normally, or less, or they decided to eat falafel that weekend or whatever. Well, like it's not a good way to sample someone's overall eating habits. And like went back to him and was like, yeah, this is an interesting study, but it's nowhere near conclusive. And that, I think, is, if it was the AI, I would train the AI, just leave that one out. Like, that one's not useful. There's no reason to go into all the methodological issues that go on with it. Just leave it out of your response and find plenty of other sources out there around this topic.
Yeah. I mean, even when I hear that, I think this is so incredibly complicated. It's in such its infancy stages. Like, the creative side I find really fascinating and interesting, D. That's the interesting part about this whole thing, is that, like, when you look at ChatGPT, for example, and you ask it to help you do something creatively, it's very fun, right? And it really kind of sparks imagination in your mind and helps you get started on things. But when you start getting into the nitty gritty of what you and I need for the work that we do, or like a lawyer, someone said the other day on a podcast I was listening to, they said, I did a test and I called my lawyer, which cost me $600 an hour. I can contest to that. Lawyers do cost $600 an hour. Not all of them, but a lot of the ones in the Bay Area. So you call them and you ask them a series of questions, legal questions. You're like, can I do this? How do I handle this? Whatever it is, right? This person did that, then asked the exact same questions in the same detail to ChatGPT and got the same results. And their question to themselves was, well, do I even need a lawyer anymore? Right? Meaning, like, a traditional lawyer can have an AI lawyer. But then it kind of comes down to something that I heard on Loveline a long time ago with Dr. Drew. He said, you technically don't pay a doctor to tell you what you can kind of go and look up or learn like they did. You pay them for judgment. So they're like, oh, I've been 25 years. I've been dealing with people who have, some sort of disease or issue or whatever it is. And I kind of have an idea on how we can best handle this based on the constant flow of patients that have had this issue that I have seen and managed, and the ups and downs and all arounds, and you're paying me for my judgment. So are we getting to a point in society where it's like, yeah, it can provide you with all the information that you need to know, but at the end of the day, you still have to make a judgment call. You have to make a decision about what it is that you want to do. And that decision comes down to judgment.
Yes. And like we said, when it comes to, at least for the misinformation guardrails, and there's going to be some, when it comes to creativity stuff, there's going to be some different things to address also. I think just providing the sourcing right now is the most important step forward. And then, like, as you said, figuring out ways in order to and then, the person can use their own judgment, but eventually getting ways to build in that kind of lawyer doctor's judgment into the AI as far as what information to present and how to interpret it. That's something that an AI could conceivably do, and will probably start to do in future iterations. And it will mean that when it comes to these misinformation guardrails, we're going to have to take another step forward as far as the reliability and the trustworthiness of the information.
It's true. Also, too, I mean, when you say, like, we have to kind of train it to get to the point where it can make these judgments for you, it's like, essentially the data exists. It's in our heads. Sometimes it's written down. Sometimes it's recorded. Sometimes it's in journals, whatever it is, right? It's like that data does exist out there. It's just whether the system is going to get that data and be able to use it for the purposes of judgment. And what I mean by that is like, when you said LexisNexis, it just like blew up my mind with questions, because I was like, wait a minute, what if we took something like ChatGPT and we imported 100% of LexisNexis into it? It was a live stream basically in it. You have court cases, you have legal opinions, you have judgments, you have outcomes, you have names, you have everything, right? Well, at that point, you could probably run a whole case through it, and it would give you an outcome, right? It's all there. It's all historical data that of what we did as humans.
Yeah, it could. They can run a simulation of kind of a one of these court cases or other situations in order to determine like what is likely to happen.
Exactly. And so it brings up a lot of questions, and it makes me realize that like when you hear people talking about these systems and you hear the complaints and you see the little news stories about certain events that occurred or issues and stuff, we are at such the infancy stages, it's not even funny. I mean, I understand now why they say, oh, we train the system, we're testing it, we're playing with it, like it's going to take years, that kind of stuff, is because we can't even answer these basic questions right now. And the system is literally piping out answers to big questions we're asking it, and then in some cases making up information as it goes along just to ensure that it has an outcome for us.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's not really a finished product, and it's not linked. And I think maybe it started linking to live data recently.
Yeah. I think for pro users.
Yeah, but I think it's been kind of a demonstrator up to that point, and I think now we're going to start seeing a little bit more. I think I haven't really played too much with the new Chat GPT-4, but it'll be interesting to see kind of where they're going as far as the kind of utility version of it as far as sourcing information.
Well, this is essentially where your second degree comes into play, because I believe from a fundamental like creation standpoint or engineering standpoint, that part is kind of on the rails. Like they built what they built, they know how to build it. Now it's more the philosophy and psychology. How do we make sure that it's doing what we want it to do in the ways that we want to do and ethically bound to certain, rules and guidelines? Like, how do we ensure that? We need people who have psychology, philosophy, sociology backgrounds, right? That can really think through a lot of these very challenging questions that we're as a society trying to answer.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're trying to get to at this podcast. Is this is a new field? Well, not that new, I guess, but it's being used in new ways.
Yeah.
And the ethics are not quite established yet. And those are some of the things that we're talking about. So it should be kind of, I don't know that for sourcing, I don't know if that it needs to be required from a legal standpoint, but if you did provide, I think it's one of the ways in which when it comes to a chat bot like this that can be providing information, I think providing sourcing does a couple things. One, it allows, not only does it allow from an ethical standpoint, the user to judge the trustworthiness or get to those sources and things, but it also builds credibility in the AI of you look at it and you can follow it to its source and find that the AI is correct in its interpretation of what it sourced, and then you can trust it more. And I think for that reason, it's one of the things that will naturally start to happen. It'll just become a default within it as they start to build out the user experience behind it.
Yeah. But I mean, don't you think it's important to like have a process oriented system internally at these companies? Because I mean, like I just heard the other day, there's 200 plus startups in San Francisco focusing on AI now. Like it is exploding. I have, honestly, I can't remember the last time I saw this much craze around a segment since the beginning of the internet. And I'm not even kidding, because even with crypto stuff, like at least half the people were just kind of like, I don't know if I believe in this. What do we need this for? With this, everyone's like, yeah, I could see value in this area or this area or this area. Like everyone has a different opinion about where they would love to apply this. So it really comes down to something that I'm curious about, which is testing. How much do we need to basically, sandbox every change, decision, protocol update, etc., from these companies before we should be releasing them to the general public?
Well, I think it's going to be important to do so, especially when it comes to AI, probably more so with a lot of other software that's out there. And I feel as though even just QA testing, not even the UX testing, which it feels as though for ChatGPT, when I look at it, I feel as though this is very engineering kind of developed. There's not a
Uh-huh.
lot of UX people that worked on this because there's not a lot of use cases built into it just yet. As not one of the first things we would do when we were working with the development of a product is tell your users what this is for specifically. Like, you can use this for this, this, and this. The idea of coming in and doing what ChatGPT has done and saying like, oh, try it out for all these different things and find out what it's useful for. That's not usually something we would do, because you end up in that tyranny of choice of just analysis paralysis of like trying to figure out what I can use this thing for, which is what I ran into as far as when I was first kind of experimenting with it. Was like, all right, well, let me think of what I could try to do with this that Google can't do. So to your point, I think that what you're saying as far as like getting all these UX people and people who are thinking about it from a psychological and philosophical standpoint about like what can and should this do, I think that's coming. I don't think it's been heavily applied yet. And when it does, we're going to see kind of a next level of it delivering on its potential.
Yeah. I mean, I know you'd written a note here, which I thought was really interesting. You said overrideability and warning systems. Can you tell me
Yeah.
a little bit more about what you meant by that?
So we're kind of moving away from kind of. So this, I think, we should reiterate a little bit about the malfunction guardrails. So the danger of malfunctions is kind of a little is less when it comes to like a chatbot and more like AIs that are going to be more practical in your life. So it's going to be your self-driving car, your automated gardener with lawnmower functionality, your AI-driven delivery vehicle or whatever that happens to be. And if your self-driving car starts to malfunction and go off the road, you need that override ability and you need that warning sign. Like there needs to be first kind of a reliability threshold of knowing like, all right, well, this system is going to operate within accepted parameters 98% of the time. We need to figure out what that threshold is and then make sure that in pop development and testing, the AI testing, that it's reaching those levels before it's released.
Mm-hmm.
And then it needs to know, like for a lot of the AI self-driving systems currently, we know areas in which they struggle. Like if certain lights are going on or if certain types of vehicles are stopped on the road, we know that it has a hard time with it. So the AI system needs to recognize, all right, I'm running into a situation where I have been the AI has been established to not do very well at this, and inform the user so that they can heighten their their vigilance over what's going on, or just take control and get through that tricky situation. Like if it has a hard time when the snow or something like that, then that person needs to be on heightened vigilance or just take control. And if I've seen videos of self-driving cars kind of malfunction and like take off and go too fast or run into things, it needs to be an easy and quick way for the user to get it, either emergency stop or take control and stop and not have to fight with the AI at that point. You can imagine if you have an AI driven lawnmower, you'd want the same thing. A quick way to just like hit stop. You're about to hit something I don't want you. You're about to run over and mow something I don't want you to mow. Those kinds of things need to be built into the system so you can quickly stop it from doing things you don't want it to do. That might be unsafe.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're talking about AI related to like driving and stuff like that, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you'd apply it across the board to everything. I mean, like I saw, for example, the first fully automated McDonald's the other day with no employees in it, and I
Yeah.
thought to myself, they probably have to have a lot of reliability thresholds and issues, and I mean, and testing done because you know people are kind of cruising up inside of the store and just picking up food, and there's nobody in there, and this is new to society, right? Same thing with
Well,
going through
think
the
about
drive-through.
the safety issues with that. Like you have an automated cooking system in the back. What if it caught fire? And what if that fire spread to other buildings?
Yeah,
So having, you're probably for quite a while are going to need human supervisors to overlook these things. And when things start to have issues to start to run out of control, maybe a battery gets too hot,
hmm,
or maybe if for an automated restaurant, maybe like it's starting to put the wrong things in the food that are not supposed to be editable. Like maybe
yeah,
somebody spills a bottle of bleach inside or something like that. Somebody leaves it in the wrong spot when they're cleaning. Then those are things you need to to be able to recognize and prevent and stop as they're happening, because accidents will continue to happen.
Are you basically saying that becoming a supervisor means I have to work for the AI?
Well, yeah, I guess. I don't
Kind
know.
of.
I mean, ultimately,
Wait. So humans are now, we're officially now working for the AI. We work for our AI overlords.
well, I mean, who knows how long that's been going on. But yeah, it's going to take collaboration between human and AI systems in order to get things going, and maybe always will. And I think that's just, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just something to kind of keep in mind. But unless an AI system is going to have the tools to take a look at the burger they just made and make sure that there's no like strychnine got spilled into it on accident,
Yeah,
then you'll probably need some kind of supervision in order to make sure.
that's true. Well, let's talk a little bit about security guardrails, things like privacy and encryption and that kind of stuff. Um, we're getting pretty good with encryption and privacy. Like I know that it's always something that comes up when we continue to refine it, and I'm not just talking about like government, regulation, things like that, but I'm just talking about
Mhm.
the technology behind it. Like, I mean, this has been going on for a really long time, but I'm really impressed with actually the way that encryption has been evolving over time, as well as kind of the ability to from a privacy standpoint to just say like, no, I don't want this data being sent. I want this stuff to be
Mhm.
owned by me, that kind of stuff. I almost feel like that's an area where we probably could thrive early on when it comes to AI.
Well, it's one of the challenges because you have human minds on one side trying to create a great deal of privacy and like rock steady encryption, but then you have other human minds on the other side of things trying to break those. So there's a constant, arms race of between the white hats and the black hats in that
Yeah,
situation. One of the reasons, just to reiterate this, because it's been a while since the danger section that we did, the danger podcast that we did,
yeah,
if you're going to have an AI like assistant that's going to help you schedule your meetings or schedule your appointments and things like that, it's going to know a lot about you. Even if it's just a chatbot that's going to be personalizing chat results, or if you have a something that's going to help you find like your travel arrangements or anything like that, or manage your healthcare, for example, then it's going to have a lot of private information about you. So just to tailor its responses to you in order to do its work. So having those important privacy guardrails, making sure it's encrypted, making sure that it's in a certain area, making sure there's a capacity to wipe the data if it's becoming compromised, or notify you if there's been a compromised situation, then that all kind of needs to be built into it.
yeah. When I hear all these things, my first thought is that with all these new startups that are coming, popping up, especially here in the Bay Area, focusing on AI, like, having them do things for you. Um, I do kind of believe that we need to have some regulation around these areas that you just discussed when it comes to privacy, encryption, data wipes, all that. Have a robust system that basically says if you're going to build a startup company, if you're going to build a company around artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
these areas have to be done. Like your engineering
Yeah.
team must ensure privacy in this way, must ensure encryption, must allow the user to wipe their data if they choose to. Like
Mhm.
all these things, I think they need to be formulated so that when you start your company, you kind of already know that this stuff is standard. Right now, it's not really required, but most of the companies know that they need to do it in order to get users, right? So
Yeah.
they do it anyways, but it would be nice to have it kind of formed out in a way that allows the general public to feel more comfortable when testing out
Mhm.
new technology in this space.
Yeah, I mean, you think about when you're talking about security, and the privacy thing is an issue, and there's another reason. Once I bring this up, it's probably going to make it clear that there's absolutely will be regulation around this.
Uh-huh.
But when you have an AI system that's helping to do something in which you could be a danger, like the self-driving cars, classic example, like we already talked about, and it could look like a malfunction and that drives you off a cliff and kills you. Now imagine there's a hacker who could take control of your system and drive your car off the cliff and make it look like an accident. That's, I think, one of the biggest concerns when it comes to security guardrails is making sure that that can't happen, or at least it's so hard enough that to make happen that it becomes incredibly rare.
Yeah. But let's talk a little bit about intellectual property. Okay. because this is what's hot in the news right this moment, which is
Yes.
if AI pulls data that is your IP, what does that mean?
Yeah. So if it's a news source, for example, then it's not considered plagiarizing because that's just information about the world. If it is pulling from a movie, if it is pulling from a work of fiction or anything else, like if you're asking for it to write a paper for you and it writes the paper, but by doing so, it's sourcing from somebody else's paper, that can very well be considered plagiarism. And if it's for a test or something, it's certainly cheating.
Yeah.
But at what point can we build it into it so that it's not plagiarizing? That I think needs to be built into an algorithm.
I mean, it all comes down to whether or not we consider simply sourcing something as being fair use, right? So if you published something online, D, and then the AI system went and grabbed chunks of what you wrote and presented
Yeah.
it to a user, but then sourced you, would you be okay with that? Or do we now have to have certain rights management software that says, oh, no, D wants a quarter every time that's done? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, well, what if I ask my AI, play immigrant song for me?
Uh-huh.
But I don't own immigrant song. I don't own a copy of immigrant song.
Yeah.
And Led Zeppelin's catalog is very strictly managed. So it's one of those things where if you went to YouTube and put up like Immigrant Song or Purple Rain
Yeah.
or some of these songs from artists who are very or Hotel California is famous for it too, right? If you put it up on YouTube, it would get taken down because you don't own the copyrights to that. But if you ask your AI to do it, what is it going to do? Is it going to tell you no? If you ask it to write a story for you about a hitman who accidentally blinds a woman and then ends up protecting her, and it tells you the story, is it sourcing from John Woo's The Killer?
Mm.
At what point do you kind of run into that if it's telling you a story that's similar to something out there, right? If you ask it to tell you a story about like an evil AI that's creating a simulation of the world that we're all living in and we're all plugged in as batteries, and it writes a story that's very similar to the Matrix, is it plagiarizing the Matrix? That's all things that have to be figured out.
We currently live in a society where people information from all kinds of different places when they write, right? They don't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
they tell stories that you say, "Oh, that kind of reminds me of the Matrix," but it's not the Matrix. The Matrix was something very specific. So, it would only be plagiarism, correct, if I actually pulled exact wording from the Matrix or, copied
No,
it
no, no, no. I don't think it has to be copied exactly. I think if it takes, we've seen this I've been looking into some of the like song copyright cases and listening to some of the things around plagiarism for
Yeah.
for stories. If you take enough as far as the treatment of the idea,
Uh-huh.
you can't just change a few words. You'd have to do more than that. You might have to change a character or a plot sequence or something like that in order to get you there. But it raises the question, if I ask for something like that and it provides it to me and I turn around and repost it somewhere, who's liable? Am I liable? Is the company who created the AI liable? Like, because there's a chance that somebody can get sued. Now, who is that person? So I think that the people creating the AI who could source these things, if you're writing a paper and it's sourcing from famous biography of Lincoln, right? That's not just strict facts usually. That's
Mhm.
usually comes down to somebody's treatment about his story, his personal story. So it becomes like, all right, what we have to be careful in order to avoid both getting the companies creating the AI in trouble as well as getting that end user in trouble if they're going to use it somewhere else.
Yeah, it gets complicated really quickly. I understand why they want to have a discussion around, uh, liability and whether or not these companies should be liable if the AI pulls information, gives it to someone else, and says, "Yeah, it's all fair game for you to use this." Because if you put the onus basically on the company that creates the AI, then they're going to be forced to spend a ton of time in engineering, ensuring that information that is pulled from the internet, from other sources, is properly sourced or is adjusted enough, I guess, that it's a
Yeah.
it's a summary, but it doesn't actually like, break any laws, right? And so,
Yeah.
because you can't put it on the end user, it's unfair. Like D goes and says, "Oh, I'm going to use ChatGPT and do something fun," and he does something fun, and then he writes up some story that he maybe modifies a little bit from some information that ChatGPT provided, and then suddenly you turn it in, and they're like plagiarism, and you're like, "Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know it was plagiarized."
And I feel like a lot of times the stuff that I'm reading from people's stories that are generated on ChatGPT currently, they feel very cut and paste from other stories to me.
Mm.
Or they're so generalized that they could absolutely be descriptions of somebody else's book or screenplay or movie or song or something. So this came up when I was asking for it to give me tabs for songs, like guitar tabs for songs. It was like,
Hmm.
and it would provide it, and I was like, ooh, if this was accurate, would it be a trademark violation or a copyright violation? That's, I think, an interesting question. And I think it's going to have to get figured out in order for something like this to become commercially viable.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the next one here, which is these human replacement guardrails. So should AI generated content be ineligible for IP protection?
I think I heard this on a podcast. I heard this on
Yeah.
there's the Script Notes podcast by Craig Mazin and John Austin, which is I highly recommend to everybody. But they tested out ChatGPT and had it write a script. And somebody brought up, because it's not written by a human being, where do the IP rights go? Does it go to the company that created the AI? Does it go to the
Mm.
person who asked the query? Is it somewhere in between? Or because it wasn't created by an individual, by a human being who can hold rights, and the AI itself isn't something that can hold rights, it's kind of an algorithm ultimately, or a collection of algorithms. Is it just treated like natural law, and now it's just something that's automatically in the public sphere? I kind of lean towards that. I think if it is created by an AI, it's just public use. It's free use at that point.
That's how I feel about it. But I can imagine these companies looking at this as the biggest cash cow in the history of technology companies.
Oh
Basically
yeah.
saying anything our company creates, we own the IP for, means that every movie that's created based on a script that was produced out of there, everything, all the money flows back to those companies. And you can imagine that you would have lobbyists on K Street saying, hey, we need to give AI the same rights that we give humans.
But then who can execute those rights? Is the AI itself, or is it the owning company? Does those change if the company gets acquired? Like who owns, if, for example, imagine that you were, a screenwriter who's, let's say you're an aspiring screenwriter, right? And you write a script, and that script, you helped get an outline from it or get the idea from, you ask ChatGPT, tell me a story, and it tells you a story, and you take that story, you modify it, and you turn it into a script, and then you sell it. And now maybe you sold it to Warner Brothers, and they make the movie, and then somebody at OpenAI realizes that this came from a query that was asked,
Mm-hmm.
and they own the copyright. Are they now going to be suing Warner Brothers? I think so. If
I
that's
think
the
so.
case,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that can get people into a lot of trouble.
Yeah. This is a complicated one. This is where this one's going to require almost like yeah, I don't even know how to respond to that. That's
You're,
a really challenging one.
I think we're probably going to need, ultimately, you probably need legislation around this in
Yeah,
order to
for sure.
define how the IP cases come about, or how the IP is assigned. In the meantime, there will probably be some safeguards. But when it comes to human replacement, people are worried about, what if they replace, writers or screenwriters or musicians or something, because, the studio says it's so much easier to do this through an AI. If it brings up that, like, hey, if you do that, you could be spending $60 million to produce a movie that, through some act of Congress or the courts, wipes out your AI, and it's now whatever it is enters the public domain, and you have no control over the IP anymore.
Hmm.
Then they are probably going to put out instructions that none of the people can use AI because it muddies up the IP.
Yeah. As you can tell, this is going to be, this actually highlights the importance of people who are getting elected to Congress to have at least a very basic background in understanding technology. because they're going to have to make
Yes.
pretty big decisions when it comes to our privacy and our intellectual property rights and things like that, right? It really highlights how it's going to be kind of almost a requirement for a lot of these elected individuals to understand this stuff at a deep level.
Yeah, I think it's a whole other rabbit hole because I think the vast majority of them do not understand it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And we need them to step up in this case. So I think that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
But where do you think it would be appropriate for humans to be replaced by AI?
I definitely think things that are extremely dangerous for human beings.
Hmm.
Like, I don't think there's any reason why we need to put people in extreme danger. Um, I'll give you a good example. It's not AI, but I really, really appreciate it, which is drones.
Yeah,
For the longest times, you would have the National Park Service, lots of individuals having to use helicopters to fly to really scary places, in order
yeah,
to look at vegetation on the side of a mountain in Hawaii, or to make sure things are okay, or get to these really toxic locations, and having to wear masks and try to fly their helicopters into it. Now you just take a drone and just fly it over there, and you have a live stream on it, and you can get as close
yeah,
as you want. And if you lose the drone, who cares? It's not a human life. It's just a drone, right? And
yeah.
so those types of things I think are fantastic. When it comes to AI, I would love to see more AI driven toward the medical field, because I read a great article about how AI is being used in order to look at scans, like CT
Mhm.
scans and things like that, before they are given to a professional, right? So
Yeah.
basically, all of them run through. It has like a 90 something percent accuracy on it, right? And
Hmm.
then it shoots, and in order to completely ensure that everything is proper, it's given to a professional after that, and then the professional looks at it and verifies it, right? That's where we are in this phase, right? But
Hmm.
they said to be 90 something percent accurate means that people can get a scan, like a CT scan, and like within seconds it'll just say, oh, we don't see anything, you're good to go home, or hey, we noticed this little thing, we're going to send it off to a professional, let them examine it, right? We can go through a lot more stuff more quickly. And some of the research that was conducted showed that the AI did a better job than the actual radiologists. So it
Hmm.
looks like there's might be a slight shifting of the guards here, where it's like the AI can be a little bit better at it. And if they are, it can really help with saving human lives.
Yeah, I think there is a place for that. I think currently the requirements are that the radiologist can't, or the whoever's handling the test, whether it's radiology or some other form of imaging or something else, or a lab, for example, they can't tell you anything, and they probably shouldn't. They speak to your doctor, and then your
Mm-hmm.
doctor interprets the findings based on your history and everything else, and tells you what's going on. Um, I think that one of the great ways that AI can help out there is smoothing out your communication, the communication amongst people, because sometimes it seems like I have to tell one doctor what another doctor told me, rather than just
Yes.
kind of knowing or being communicating amongst themselves, or the records going back and forth.
Yep.
Um, there's so much stuff to be done in medical. The other thing that can happen is, and I went through this for my father. He had cancer, passed away. My aunt went through this when her partner had cancer and passed away. But navigating the healthcare field,
Mm.
knowing when to ask for pricing, when they have to fight the insurance companies, scheduling appointments, all those things, an AI can be tremendously helpful there. And it's something now where they're turning to, either they're doing it 100% themselves and doing the best they can when they're in an emotional and compromised state a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
or they're turning to a friend or family member to help them who's
Yep.
not very knowledgeable necessarily about this. And it's something where an AI can help tremendously.
I love it for this field. I really do, because it's like you said, there's a lot that can be updated basically in the medical field to make things, better for the end user. And I love what you said about the gaps there. It's true. Like, you get, like, let's say, a colonoscopy done, and then you're in your mind, you're like, does that get sent to my GP, or my regular doctor? I don't know. Maybe it
Yeah.
does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe I have to tell him when I see him. Like,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of good communication there, and it also doesn't even tell you what to do next. So, like, for
Mhm.
example, I recently had a medical procedure, and then they said, okay, we'll do a follow-up on this in X number of years, right? And
Yeah.
then my first thought in my mind was, I was like, do I need to put that in the calendar? Do they put that in the calendar? Like, nobody told me. Like, so now
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here going, okay, well, I guess when I'm this age, I should call them back, right? Like, it's kind of nebulous.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to human replacement guardrails, the first thing is the creative fields, like
Yeah.
the songwriters, the book writers, the storytellers, managing that IP so that the people can't own the IP. It's developed by a machine. There's no reason why an individual human should be able to lay claim to it. It's just, let's just leave that open. That way, anybody who's paying money to develop content isn't going to see an advantage of replacing those humans with machines. And then beyond that, it will kind of fall to look. The AI will naturally gravitate towards areas that are either dangerous, like logging or transportation or police work. Honestly, getting into kind of that RoboCop field,
Yeah.
that is going to be a whole other field that might have like maybe any kind of AI system associated with that has no access to weapons because there's no reason for them to defend themselves. It's just a machine. Go ahead and replace it. But anything that's dangerous, it'll go towards, and a lot of stuff for people want to work will be less likely to be replaced by humans because there's not a financial motivation.
Absolutely. Final thing here I wanted to talk about. I want to bring up something I read that was really interesting that I think the people who listen to this podcast might find fascinating. I read an article that was done on Medium by Julie Anderson. And so she's a UX designer. And what she did was she used ChatGPT to talk to her younger self. And she basically held a conversation with her teenage self using an AI chatbot. And it was really interesting. So she took all the journals that she had when she was younger and she basically inputted those into the OpenAI playground. And then she asked it questions and basically had this conversation with a version of herself. So the system learned from the information that she uploaded into ChatGPT. And so it would respond as if it was her because those were her journals. So it kind of learned how she writes, how she thinks, that kind of stuff. And I thought this was a really fascinating kind of psychology experiment with oneself because she took this data that was years and years and years of written journals and she put it into this system and she started having this conversation. And just think about how interesting this would be, right? Asking it, questions about life, about love, about all these different things. But when I was done reading the article, something else popped up in my mind. It was now that she uploaded all of this journal data into ChatGPT, who owns it? Does ChatGPT now have all of this journal data and forever that's part of its system? Its system now has learned information about this person, right? Through these journal articles. These journals that she wrote. So my thought is like, oh no, like once you upload this, if it owns it, then can you get it back? And what does that actually mean? So I wanted to get your
Yeah.
thoughts on this.
Well, it brings up an ethical issue. I mean, we have current guardrails about who owns the data that you upload, and I think that's built into GDPR and plenty of other things. It's ultimately that data is owned by the user. But there are other situations that I can think of that are very similar. Like, for example, this person used an AI to basically trained the AI to mimic herself.
Okay.
From a different time frame. Now, you can imagine somebody else using this. What if somebody else used the Diary of Anne Frank in order to train an AI to mimic Anne Frank? Now, is that infringing on anybody's rights? Just human rights, not even intellectual property rights. Is this like going to be offensive to the memory of Anne Frank in any way? Does she have, she didn't have any children, but does she have surviving relatives who could be associated with this?
Yeah.
You could look at other people, like if they did it with J.R.R. Tolkien, who had a bunch of letters that were available, or other famous writers, or even if somebody somehow, I'm going to delve into like speculative fiction here. This is probably going to turn into a somebody's movie at some point, right? Somebody got a hold. Let's say you had a journal, Brian,
Uh-huh.
and somebody stole all your journal entries. Maybe it was an electronic journal and they copied it.
Okay.
Then they're obsessed with you, single white female style.
Uh-huh.
So they create a fake AI Brian to be their best friend or romantic interest or something,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just living this secret life in which they're interacting with a fake version of you.
Yeah.
That certainly seems to infringe on like how your likeness should be used by other systems. It's essentially the next level deep fake.
Yeah. But I don't know about this though. Right? Meaning like if I don't if I don't know that somebody's using my, I don't know, style of writing or thinking in order to create this AI to have a better life or to have a more interesting life or fun life or whatever it is they're trying to do, it doesn't really affect me in any way. But when you frame it up that way, it's like, oh,
Is
someone just stole
yeah.
your personality basically.
Well, imagine also, okay, imagine this is a world of deep fakes, right? So they can use what we talked about with the AI from Unreal Engine. They can do a deep fake of you to go along with that personality of your face, of
Mm-hmm.
your image, of your personality, of your voice. They can have an entire AI being that's heavily influenced by you. And you mentioned like as long you had an if in there, you had a conditional. If I don't know about it and they're using it to live a better life, what if
Yeah.
they're not? What if you become aware? What if they're using it in ways that are like you're uncomfortable with,
Mm-hmm.
and whether they're just doing something personal or committing crimes, or maybe they're sending out AI Brian to yell at people
Mm-hmm.
and be mean to them, or to spout racist stuff on the internet and then make it seem like it was you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's and you become aware of it. Like those are all things that in the the rule of large numbers just becomes a widespread thing. It absolutely will happen. So that's something that how do we avoid that
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah. That's super interesting. So I was told, D, that when I was born that I am unique and there's only one of me. Are you trying to tell me that there's no longer going to be just one of me?
There never was. There's billions of people out there, and chances are, I mean, throughout history, there was someone who looked and talked and thought exactly like you at
What's
some
that
point.
line from Fight Club? He's like, "You are not a beautiful snowflake."
Yeah, and then you get into multiverse stuff, which I
Yeah.
mean, most of that's made up. But if you believe in the multiverse stuff, then there's an exact duplicate of you out there somewhere in the cosmos.
Yeah.
But it does bring up a point of like there are a lot of ethical concerns that we're not even aware of yet, and that we're going to become aware of probably the hard way.
Yeah. Maybe it's time to just get that cabin we've always talked about and just kind of move up into the mountains and just get off the grid. I mean, I think we need to leave the matrix for a while because this is starting to really depress me, this conversation.
Well, I mean, we're getting into kind of the negative stuff, but there's plenty of positive stuff. There's a lot of like additional safety. Maybe we can clear up some of this. Like, so one of the things, and I had this conversation with a friend of mine who's a police officer, of what if there were using AI drones to approach people who were active shooters and things in order to even just get situational awareness on them rather than running in guns blazes and accidentally shooting somebody who's unarmed. Could a system like this prevent on the death of unarmed citizens because of accidental shootings, people
Yeah.
protecting themselves?
Well, I'll tell you, there was someone on the loose, someone on the run near my neighborhood one of these days, and I drove by the police officer, and I was like, "What does the police officer have on her face?" And I stopped the car and looked more closely. She had goggles on, and there was a drone up in the sky, and she had her remote control, and she was following this person with the drone.
Yeah.
And I was like, so that's a perfect example. They're not going to like get the helicopters out and all that kind of stuff from this person that's running. She literally had the drone follow them. And I am sure this drone, because it's a police drone, has software you can tap on it and it'll just continue to follow them automatically and you just monitor it. And I was like, here we are. Like this happened near my house like a year
Yeah.
ago.
So it brings up other ethical concerns, right? I mean, you're trading one for another. And I'm going to say that maybe it's a decent trade because one of the things what we're talking about is potentially, and my police officer friend brought this up of like, are you creating a surveillance state by
Yeah.
having drones out there watching people?
Yeah.
And that is a legitimate concern. And there would need to be ethical rules and guidelines and accountability for, who watches the watchmen to make sure they're not being abused. So that it's not just every single person's being watched by a drone at all times, or anywhere close to that. But if you're trading that for innocent, unarmed people dying in the streets because of, concerns that that person had a firearm when they didn't, then it's worth looking into
It's true.
for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. It's one of those things you test it, try it, explore it, challenge it, and kind of see where we land, right?
yeah, I think there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think it might make sense to wrap up. But I think that it makes sense for the AI to be distributed and for different AIs to focus on different use cases. And you can have one AI that's good for transportation, one AI that cleans your house, another AI that is your medical assistant or your travel agent or your writing assistant or whatever it is. But I think it makes a lot of sense to separate them out by both product and by maybe even by company too, so that not one company completely dominates the space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just standard monopoly stuff. But it's also so that you don't end up in another movie we could have referenced here. A couple of them could have been the Terminator. That
Yeah.
avoids a Skynet situation where you have one AI that controls everything, and if it malfunctions or goes bad or whatever it happens to be, then everything's affected. Or if it goes down, then everything goes down.
Mm-hmm.
Or you end up in the other one I was thinking about was Maximum Overdrive, where you can
Oh,
have a
yeah.
AI controlled like soda dispenser shooting cans at people trying to kill them. Now, obviously, as we mentioned before, the AI is not going to try to kill you because it has no motivation to. There's nothing to gain from them trying to kill people. They don't have emotions and motivations in that way. But you can see, like, if it's one AI managing multiple systems and that AI starts to go down or have issues for whatever reason, you can have safety issues in multiple areas. You can have dependencies that are broken down. There are people who are abandoned, who need support, those kinds of things. So I think by having them focused on one AI for one use case, it helps them to really focus in on the user experience for that use case and make sure it's delivering well. And also helps to build a little bit more safety into the system.
I agree. I agree 100%. And I think this is a good place to wrap. You know why? Because I'm thoroughly confused and paranoid at this point. I just want to point out that this is way more complicated than, I mean, you and I always talk about this stuff prior to doing these podcasts, but then we get into it and our brains start to like really turn on and start coming up with these ideas and stuff. It makes me realize
Yeah,
how complicated it is and why I like working in it, to be honest with you, because I,
yeah,
I find it intellectually stimulating and exciting to be able to try to figure these things out and kind of walk that line between innovation and something that really kind of helps humanity without causing trouble, you know?
yeah. Well, just for the audience at home, or wherever you are, just keep in mind that we probably talked about two or three like dangers in this podcast that we hadn't even considered before we started recording today. They're like the artificial Brian. I hadn't even really thought about that until we started talking about it.
Exactly. It just came up. I was looking on here and I was like, there's no notes about artificial Brian in here, so let's just roll with it.
Well, Brian, you brought up the person who created kind of an artificial younger self, and I was like, oh wow, that could be abused.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I also want to point out today is actually our last episode of season 7. I can't even believe it. We have plowed through and done quite a few episodes. I had some excellent interviews, and I just can't believe we're here. But we're going to kind of spin up season 8 quite quickly because Demetrius and I are in talks with quite a few people to do other interviews that we find interesting and fascinating that we think the rest of you that are listening will really benefit from. So thank you everyone for sticking with us on season 7. Our numbers have grown quite a bit. We've actually doubled almost every year since we started the podcast in 2020 during the pandemic, and we're really happy. And we'd love double again and get more listeners, because we like to challenge everybody intellectually by thinking about a lot of these different topics that we discuss here in the Valley all the time. So thanks everyone for listening today. We really appreciate it. Like I said before, if you want to make comments or anything, you can go to the X Podcast on YouTube and make comments. We read all of them. And if you found this podcast exciting, interesting, informative, please tell a friend about it. Rate us on the podcast player of your choice, and like us, all the fun stuff in order to keep this project moving along. So everyone, thank you so much. Have a great week, and we will see you all in season 8.